Rising to start this list off at number 10 is the fire attribute powerhouse Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 8. Releasing in 2004's Soul of the Duelist set, Horus's 3000 attack and 1800 defense give it a pretty solid standing during the battle phase, but its super strong effect is what earns it a placement on this list. Often, Floodgate effects are balanced around both players having to work around the restrictions, like skill drain, which, spoiler alert, we'll be talking about later. But some cards are meaner than that, which brings us to the ultimate monster in the Horus level line. Its Floodgate effect is selective and wildly so. Where some cards blanketly negate spells or make them slower to play, Horus gives the controlling player the option of negating and destroying every single spell that activates. This is an absurd amount of power over the state of the game. Spell cards are some of the most impactful cards in the game, and having the freedom to use them while your opponent can't is game-winning levels of lockdown. So, if it's so good, why hasn't Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 8 seen competitive play to match its power level? That's because of its summoning conditions. Horus cannot be normal summoned or set, and even more constricting, cannot be special summoned by anything other than the effect of Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 6. The bright side is that the big Horus can be summoned from the deck by the medium Horus, which doesn't have to be summoned by little Horus to go into the big dragon, but you'll still have to attack and destroy an opponent's monster with Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 6 to trade it out for level 8 during the end phase. The workaround to this is to use the spell card Level Up, which can evolve level 6 into level 8, immediately ignoring its summoning conditions. But now you're devoting probably too much of your deck to breaking out this powerful but slow monster. Even Horus's retrained archetype gave up on the old level evolution mechanic, drawing aesthetic inspiration from the original card, but deriving little else. Horus the Black Flame Deity is a good card and much more adaptable than its previous incarnation. But it's also not a floodgate. Still, despite these difficulties, Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 8 would shockingly see a handful of competitive placements during Dragon Ruler format, which is a testament to just how good it can be if you manage to get it on the field. Horus wouldn't catch an anime original appearance until episode 168 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime, used by duelist Taigo Serrano against Jaden Yuki. Although Taigo would summon his ace, it would eventually fall to Jaden's Elemental Hero Flame Neos, and Taigo would go on to lose the duel. Salty at this defeat, Taigo's emotional unrest causes deck to become corrupted with darkness, attracting the shadow entity known as Truman. In episode 172, Truman would use Taigo's deck, including Horus and Black Flame Dragon level 8, to defeat Tyranno Hazelberry. But as cool as Horus is, it doesn't have the staying power of other Floodgates from Classic YGO. Fortunately, that doesn't completely disqualify Horus from this list, instead making the biggest Black Flame Dragon the perfect candidate for the bottom spot.
Oh no, I seem to be lost in these woods. I hope no one tries to sell me product.
Hello there, are you interested in eating healthy but hate shopping for the correct portion sizes? They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and HelloFresh agrees. In fact, they're giving all subscribers free breakfast for life.
Oh thank goodness. Can you tell me how to get back to the main road?
Give HelloFresh a try and choose from 30 plus calorie smart and protein smart recipes each week. Packed with fresh ingredients, everything arrives pre-portioned and right at your doorstep for less hassle and more
I just want to get home.
With summer in the rearview mirror and busy days ahead, we're all craving wholesome meals that can save us time and money. HelloFresh has something for everyone. Each box is fully customizable to fit your preferences and includes pre-portioned ingredients, so you only pay for what you need. Because I don't know about you, but I hate having leftover ingredients when trying to follow a recipe I found online.
I was out here to bury a body.
Support the channel by clicking my link and subscribing to HelloFresh. Every purchase helps me create more awesome content for you. For this list number 9 spot, we're choosing to play tribute to the Ojama King, a level 6 Light Beast fusion that's also released in Soul of the Duelist. With 0 attack and 3000 defense, it might not seem like much of the offensive force that Horus was, but underestimate the Ojamas is at your own peril. It looks a little funky, but Ojama King packs a powerful Floodgate effect. When Ojama King hits the field, you get to select up to 3 of your opponent's main monster zones and lock them down. This comes at the cost of a triple monster fusion, since Ojama King's materials are 3 low-level normal monsters with no attack: Ojama Green, Ojama Yellow, and Ojama Black. But the Ojamas have Search and Swarm to compensate for the cost of Ojama King, with cards like Oja Magic, which when sent from hand or field to the grave searches the 3 previously named Ojamas, and Ojama Red, which on normal summon can special summon up to 4 Ojamas from hand. But while that's all very fun and cool, thankfully there's no restrictions on cheating Ojama King out of the extra deck. Meaning that if you're playing GOAT format, you can use Metamorphosis plus any level 6 to immediately lock down 3 of your opponent's main monster zones. This is probably why competitive usage of Ojama King dropped significantly following Metamorphosis' October 2005 introduction to the limit list, going from 3 usable copies to just 1. While Ojama King would never recover from the limiting and eventual banning of Metamorphosis, it's still out there waiting. One day, some other card will open the door to easily cheat out level 6 plus effect fusions, and the King will return, potentially combined with the continuous spell Ground Collapse to lock out all of your opponent's main monster zones. And in Duel Links, Ojama King was also pretty good. When it released with the GX World in September 2017, the extra monster zone was years away from becoming part of the format. You only had 3 monster zones total, and Ojama King could lock them all down instantly. While never a true meta threat, if you weren't prepared for it, you lost to it, and Ojama King would continue to see inclusion on King of Game decks lists for years to come, although often in unsummonable capacity and only included because it's funny or by fans of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, which is where Ojama King made the bulk of his anime appearances. First summoned in episode 39 during Chaz Princeton's duel against Don Zalug, Ojama King was a mainstay in the deck of Chaz for the rest of the series. The final time it hit the field was in episode 165 against Jade and Yuki, although it did have a brief appearance in episode 106 of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 as well. And at number 8, we're activating another important card from Yu-Gi-Oh! Animes, and arguably one of the most iconic spells in the game, Swords of Revealing Light. Releasing all the way back in the TCG's first ever set, The Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon, Swords of Revealing Light would also feature in the format's first iteration of the Limitless, getting knocked down to 2 playable copies in May of 2002, and just 1 by December. Although powerful board breaker spells like Raigeki and Dark Hole were a huge part of classic Yu-Gi-Oh!, the pace of the game was much slower, and the battle phase much more important. Swords of Revealing Light put a stop to that for 3 of your opponent's turns, during which time the card will remain on the field despite being a normal spell. That bit of funkiness is a result of the card releasing before some of the game's particulars had been fully locked down, and is an interesting thing to note. Modern retrains of the card, like Swords of Concealing Light and Spiritual Swords of Revealing Light, are continuous, but the normal categorization of the original Revealing Swords has persisted. So, Swords of Revealing Light stops your opponent from declaring attacks during the battle phase for 3 of their turns until the card removes itself and the floodgate opens. But there are other ways to stop your opponent from attacking that can last longer, like Gravity Bind, Messenger of Peace, Array of Revealing Light, Wall of Revealing Light, Level Limit Area B, and even Thousand Eyes Restrict. Still, Swords of Revealing Light takes a spot because it's been around since the beginning, and is a very distilled version of a floodgate. You activate this card and your opponent can't attack. Oh, and all their face-down monsters are flip face-up. We hadn't even mentioned this part of the effect yet because it's less important since not too many cards rely on flipping, and often those that do have ways to rebook and flip themselves anyway. Of the floodgates similar to Swords of Revealing Light, Messenger of Peace and Thousand Eyes Restrict saw and continue to see the most experimentation, which we're mentioning now because for the purposes of this video, I want each card to perform a different function, so they won't come up later. But that's not because they aren't important in their own right, but the cultural importance of Swords of Revealing Light in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is apparent from the prevalence of related cards and art features. The swords shine in the artwork of a Release Restraint Wave, Scarlet Security, Force Activation, Heraldry Burst, and maybe Silent Swordsman level 3. And it even has a monster evolution in the form of Swordsman of Revealing Light. In addition to Swords of Concealing Light and Spiritual Swords of Revealing Light, Array of Revealing Light and Wall of Revealing Light also take inspiration from this iconic spell. And there's even the monster Weather Control, which destroys all of your opponent's copies of Swords of Revealing Light as a flip effect, and grants a second battle phase immediately after your next one if the destruction is successful, so watch out. That Maneater bug you were expecting to safely neutralize with swords before playing your monsters might be a Weather Control instead. Anime-wise, this card got original protagonist Yugimoto out of a ton of jams, including Yugi's first duel against Eto Kaiba in episode 1, and again in this ceremonial duel to bookend the end of the series in episode 221. But even before Duel Monsters, Swords of Revealing Light appeared in the first anime with Yugi using it to stall for time while he drew Exodia. It's also got brief appearances in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, 5Ds, and Zexal, providing further confirmation of this card's iconic status. Upon reflection, the number 7 spot on this list will go to 2 cards, but they're both mirrors, so it makes sense to see double. Light-Imprisoning Mirror and Shadow-Imprisoning Mirror are both continuous traps from the 2007 set Gladiator's Assault. And where other floodgates get their viability from their oppressive broadness, Shadow and Light-Imprisoning Mirror are much more targeted. Their effects are really simple. Shadow-Imprisoning Mirror negates all dark monster effects on the field and in the graveyard. Light-Imprisoning Mirror negates all light monster effects on the field and in the graveyard. And that's really what sets these two mirrors apart from other Floodgates. They're just general enough to be good, but specific enough to never justify catching a decklist spot on their own merit. But because Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't exist in a vacuum and the strength of cards is constantly measured and recalibrated against what other cards they are likely to run into, both mirrors have seen significant amounts of competitive play over the 17 years they've been in the game. Both enjoy a consistent smattering of use, with enormous spikes in the meta shifts in a way that calls for continuous mirrors to check the power levels of light and dark. Take late 2014 for example, which is when Shadow-Imprisoning mirrors saw its largest jump in usage. At the time, dark decks dominated the meta, with Burning Abyss in particular claiming a broad swath of top placements. Shadows and Evil Swarms were also quite big, and Shadow-Imprisoning Mirror was impactful at stopping bolt strategies. While Shadow's fusion boss monster, El Shadow Construct, had a light attribute, and was therefore immune to the oppressive floodgate of Shadow-Imprisoning Mirror, the other important Shadow card like Shadow Beast and Shadow Falco weren't, and doubly did not enjoy Mirror's graveyard negates. Light-Imprisoning Mirror saw its highest spike in play at a similar time as its Shadow counterpart, though its heyday began a few months earlier in spring and summer of 2014. Decks like Bujins, Agents, and most of all Lightsworns struggled against it. And even the aforementioned El Shadow Construct and boss of the Burning Abyss, Dante, didn't want to run up against this trap. Due to their specific nature, Light and Shadow-Imprisoning Mirror often found their way into the main deck from the side deck during matches 2 and 3 rather than right away. But that actually gave the card some much needed flexibility, since duelists could run it without overcommitting to hard countering 1 or 2 attributes. And at number 6, we have another icon of Classic YGO, a level 6 dark attribute machine with 2400 attack and 1500 defense from the 2002 set Pharaoh's Servant, and it's Jinzo. From the moment Jinzo hits the field, trap cards and their effects cannot be activated. On top of that, already active trap effects are negated. Its effect is very similar to that of Royal Decree, a continuous trap that simply negates all other trap effects. But Royal Decree came out a year later than Jinzo in Tournament Pack 4 and wasn't widely available until 2005's Dark Beginning 2. Also, Jinzo is cooler, even if Royal Decree sees much more play in the modern age. So let's get back to talking about Jinzo. During Jinzo's classic Yu-Gi-Oh days, battle traps like Mirror Force, Magic Cylinder, and Sakuretsu Armor were the threats every duelist had to consider. And one way to stop yourself from triggering these traps that could only activate in response to an attack was to wait until you had Jinzo up to go for game. A dynamic that's still very real within the GOAT format, where Jinzo is limited to 1 copy for its strength. While there aren't as many ways to search out Jinzo in GOAT, since cards like Jinzo Returner, Psychic Shockwave, Transmodify, and Law of the Cosmos fall on the wrong side of the time gate, and Witch of the Black Forest was banned at the time, the presence of generic draw power cards like Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity help make up for this. Law of the Cosmos is pretty cool because its set, 2020's legendary duelist Rage of Ra, introduced a huge wave of Jinzo support to solidify the identity of the iconic trap-searching machine's own archetype. This psychic wave included Law of the Cosmos, Cosmos Channeling, Everlasting Alloy, Psychic Bounder, Psychic Mega Cyber, Jinzo the Machine Menace, and Cyber Energy Shock, but not actually Psychic Wave, because that card came out a few months earlier. Or Jinzo Layered, which came out a few days earlier in Dragons of Legend, the complete series. For such a simple effect, there are a lot of edge cases and rulings for Jinzo's interactions. For example, when Jinzo is summoned while trap monsters that are simultaneously monsters and traps, like Embodiment of Apophis, are on the field. Those trap monsters are pushed back into the spell and trap card zone, where they are left face up with no effect. If Skill Drain is already face up on the field, then Jinzo cannot enact its continuous effect to negate traps. But if Jinzo is already face up on the field first, then you cannot activate Skill Drain. Rivalry of the Warlords can stop you from summoning Jinzo if you already control 2 monsters of the same type, even though Jinzo would turn Rivalry of the Warlords off once it hits the field. While Jinzo predictably appears in many of the cards relating to its own archetype, like Amplifier and Cyber Energy Shock, its popularity has led to other artworks featuring the cards, like Factory of 100 Machines, which funny enough is a Morphtronic card, and Judgment Sword, which works with the as yet unprinted Armotos Legion Blink monsters from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains anime. Although powerful enough to sit at limit 1 from 2002 until late 2007, Jinzo would see its highest spike in usage in spring of 2017, where it found its niche countering Zodiac Combo and the Paleozoic traps, as well as other powerful floodgates like Anti-Spell Fragrance and Imperial Iron Wall. Jinzo's first anime appearance was in episode 58 of Duel Monsters, used by the duelist Espa Roba, who would first beat Rex Raptor and then immediately lose to Joey Wheeler. losing not just the match, but his Jinzo card per the forfeiture rules of the Battle City tournament. Of the cards Joey wins during the season, which also include the Legendary Fisherman, Insect Queen, and Fortress Whale, Jinzo is hands down the best, and also the only one that Joey continues to use throughout the rest of the series. But perhaps more interesting than the times Jinzo was played are the 2 occasions that Jinzo itself was an actual antagonist. In episode 108, while the remaining Battle City finalists and hangers-on were trapped in Noah Kaiba's virtual world, the digital ghost of Gozaberu Kaiba's former assistant, Aletcher, would take on the form of Jinzo to challenge Seto Kaiba to a duel for control of his mortal body. Letcher would lose, but got another chance when the members of the Big Five challenged Yugi and Joey to a tag duel that they would also lose. But Jinzo would actually appear as its own opponent a second time in episode 14 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime during a duel against Jade and Yugi, one that Jinzo would lose again. Standing watch at number 5 are the Barrier Statue monsters, represented by the Wind Attribute Rock Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. There are 6 Barrier Statues in total, 1 for each attribute minus Divine, and they were all released in the 2006 set Cyberdark Impact. Their typings vary along with their attributes, but every barrier statue has 1000 attack and defense. Their effects are also similar. Each statue prevents both players from special summoning monsters except those of their own attribute. The obvious intention here is to include the statues when you play only a single attribute, skipping around their constraints for your own plays. Because the statues don't punish their own attribute, it follows that the Barrier Statue of Heavens and Barrier Statue of Abyss are used less frequently, despite Light and Dark being the most common attributes in the game. In fact, the 2 historically used the most are the Water Attribute Barrier Statue of the Torrent and Wind Attribute Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. Torrent was especially popular in 2017, synergizing with frogs and Paleozoics. Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds saw spikes around the same time in 2016 and 17, but most notably again in 2022, where its application was so painful that this card from 2006 was banned in early 2023. Early decks to utilize Stormwinds often ran Magispectors with Ties of the Brethren at 3 copies. Other decks went all in on Barrier Statues and Stun, running multiple statues with other powerful Floodgates like Fossil Dyna Pachycephalo, Vanity's Emptiness, and Banisher of the Radiance, but those decks aren't what got Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds banned. That dubious honor belongs to Fluender Rees. The story of this archetype is cute at first. It's about a wandering birdie traveling the globe, making friends along the way, and seeing cool sights. But the story takes a dark turn as soon as you step out of card lore and into the competitive scene. Able to end its own archetypal floodgate to negate monster effects, Fluender Rees loves to play during your opponent's turn and tribute monsters. Combined with the card's penchant for banishing themselves and then adding themselves back to the hand, and the Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds option, Fluender Rees games would often rest in binary states of do you have the out or not. If you do, you get to play some. If you don't, you have to have fun doing nothing until you lose. Anyway, Fluender Rees got Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds banned, making it both one of the most played and most penalized barrier statues, and also the most fun to talk about, hence its placement as number 5 on this list. Caught in a standoff at number 4, it's a continuous trap from the 2003 set Magician's Force, Rivalry of Warlords. Like every other card on this list, it's a powerful floodgate that drastically changes how your opponent, and sometimes you, play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! By making it way harder. Specifically, Rivalry of Warlords punishes decks that contain multiple typings, which is most decks. But critically, not all. Rivalry of Warlords functions well in decks that specialize in one primary typing, like Labyrinth, which are all fiends, Runic builds, which often control very few monsters, Dragon Link, which are all mostly dragons, even Earth Machines, which are all machines, and Eldritch, which are all zombies, and even has the added bonus of running Zombie World to double down on Rivalry's ruinous effect. So those are some single type favoring decks you might run Rivalry of Warlords in, and basically any deck that wouldn't run Rivalry is at risk of getting Rivalried. It's pretty mean to decks like Branded Despia, Horus, and even Snake Eyes, and on top of that, Rivalry of Warlords can shield against the Kaijus, some of the most reliable boss monster option removals in the game. Under Rivalry, Cumulus the Sticky String Kaiju, an insect, can't tribute the Arrival Cybers at Ignister, a Cybers, as cost if you already control another Cybers monster. It's no surprise that Rivalry of the Warlord has seen expansive experimentation in the over 20 years it's been TCG legal. And it even got a spiritual sequel, Gozen Match, which does the same thing but for attributes. After release of Gozen Match in 2008, the 2 floodgates were often discussed together, and their benefits and drawbacks within different deck contexts compared to see which was best and whether you might as well run both. And since it's such a powerful card, its one anime appearance is probably pretty important, right? Well, not at all. In episode 84 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime, Prince Ojin discards Rivalry of Warlords to activate Cost Down so he can summon Satellite Cannon, which went about as well as it sounds like it went. Hey look, for number 3, it's another continuous trap from 20 years ago, Skill Drain. Releasing at the tail end of 2003 in Dark Crisis, Skill Drain is one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most played cards of all time. For more than 2 decades, it's been negating the effects of all face-up monsters for the laughably low cost of 1,000 life points. Some decks don't use many spell cards, some don't use many traps, but almost all use monsters. And most of those have effects that they want to activate on the field. In other words, Skill Drain is going to severely inhibit a lot of strategies. In many ways, Skill Drain is often harder for the controller to play around than cards that restrict based on type or attribute, like the barrier statues in Rivalry of Warlords. This gives the card an imperfect sort of balance, since not every deck wants to use it. But when it's on the field, well, powerful floodgates like Skill Drain are a big part of what keep back row board-breaking cards like Harpy's Feather Duster and Lightning Storm in business. Notably, Skill Drain does not negate monster effects that activate from the hand, graveyard, or banishment. This opens up options for making plays under Skill Drain, as well as many more decks that are able to use Skill Drain. Tenyi, for example, are an archetype of worms that love activating their effects from the hand and graveyard to power up non-effect monsters on the field. Run as many copies of Skill Drain as you can with your Tenyis. In GOAT format, Skill Drain can make your goblin armies playable. Attack with Gyra Gumo without risking half your life points, flip the Immortal of Thunder face up so its 3000 life point gain is negated, but you still take 5000 when it's destroyed. Skill Drain is on the field and all bets are off, lose your mind. And speaking of losing your mind, here's a card that might cause that to happen to you. Eradicator Epidemic Virus is number 2, and it's coming for you, your hand, your deck, and every spell or trap card that you hold on to. A normal trap from 2007's Force of the Breaker set, Eradicator Epidemic Virus is part of a long line of powerful virus cards, including Grinning Grave Virus, Full Force Virus, Deck Devastation Virus, and the infamous Crush Card Virus. This line of cards also kind of includes Doom Virus Dragon, a fusion of Crush Card Virus performed with the Fang of Critias, Planet Polluting Virus, which is part of the Alien archetype, and Virus Cannon, which is pretty bad and has the weakest thematic connection, but Kaiba uses it in the anime, so whatever. Anyway, all of these trap cards focus on tributing a monster as cost to enact floodgate effects of varying levels of power and reach over your opponent's field, hand, and deck. Usually, the effects of these viruses last 3 turns, during which all of your opponent's draws are revealed and match against the activated virus's destruction criteria, and either return to the hand or drop to the graveyard as fits. Full Force Virus targets monsters with 1500 or less defense, and Grinning Grave Virus can impact monsters of all stat lines, but also lets your opponent destroy a chosen few from their deck, which will probably benefit them more than hurt. Deck Devastation Virus destroys monsters with 1500 or less attack, and the original Crush Card Virus destroys monsters with 1500 or more. However, has steadily gained more downsides over the years with subsequent erratas, so that now it lets your opponent destroy 3 monsters under 1500 attack of their choice from their deck, and protects them from taking damage until the end of the next turn after the card resolves. And those erratas drawbacks are why we're going with Eradicator Epidemic Virus for number 2 instead of the original. The price to activate Eradicator Epidemic Virus is a little higher than the other virus cards, requiring a dark attribute monster with 2500 or more attack as tribute, but losing a strong attacker is well worth the activation of this trap. When you play Eradicator Epidemic Virus, you get to declare either spells or traps, and then search your opponent's field and hand for cards of the designated category, destroying all of them. On top of this, your opponent's next 3 draws get checked for spells or traps as names. As a normal trap, Eradicator Epidemic Virus can be searched by Trap Trick and Lilith Lady of Lament, and generic trap supporters like Absolute King Backjack can be useful as well. Although tributing a high attacker can be tough, the Dark Attribute requirement leaves some strong options. Red Eye's fusion into Meteor Black Comet Dragon can make great tribute fodder for Eradicator Epidemic Virus, especially since you can float into Summon Skull with its graveyard effect. Throw in Boogie Trap and you can potentially activate 1 copy of Eradicator Epidemic Virus twice in 1 turn to lock your opponent out of spells and traps. In the modern game, you'll most often see Eradicator Epidemic Virus used in Labyrinth decks that can supply recyclable, viable tributes able to search your viruses from the deck and grave. But Eradicator Epidemic Virus saw the most amount of play in 2013 during Dragon Ruler format, with over 180 competitive placements that year. Although the virus was often held in side decks for use in specific matchups, the Dragon Rulers were great at spamming level 7s, which could overlay into number 11 Big Eye, a dark monster with 2600 attack. You can activate Big Eye's effect to steal an opponent's monster, and then shrug off the fact that it'll be barred from attacking that turn as a result, since he contributed as cost for the Eradicator Epidemic virus. Colossal Fighter was also useful as a quick level 8 synchro monster that had both Dark Attribute and 2800 attack. Evil Swarm decks were also big at the time and made use of Eradicator Epidemic virus, and would often overlay into the rank 4 Evil Swarm Ophion, which can search an Infestation spell or trap card before enabling the virus with its 2550 attack. Before we get to the number 1 card on this list, I want to take a second to mention 2 honorable mentions: Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos. Both of these powerful floodgates effectively turn off your opponent's graveyard by rerouting cards that would go there into banishment instead, and have seen a large amount of play over the many years that have been part of the TCG. It'd be wrong not to mention them, and it'd be wrong to put them at a lower spot on this list. But the number 1 pick also is a Graveyard Disruption Floodgate that's arguably more iconic than both Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos, even if it has seen less competitive placements. Still, Fissure and Cosmos absolutely deserve mentions near the top, so I just wanted to take a moment to do that. And the number 1 spot on this list belongs to the Blazing Sun and Arid Land of the Gravekeepers with their field spell, Necrovalley. Originally releasing in the 2003 set Pharaonic Guardian, Necrovalley supports all Gravekeeper monsters with 500 point boost to attack and defense, which is totally not the reason it sees play. On top of the stat boost, Necrovalley effectively puts caution tape around all the graveyards. Cards cannot be banished from either graveyard, and all effects that would move a card out of the graveyard are negated. Effects that modify types and attributes in grave are negated as well. If you need your Elemental Sabers to change their water attribute in grave so you can access that sweet Mullen Glacia double hand rip, no you don't, and you won't. Your Magical Stone Excavation will fail. Chaos Dragon Legionnaire is dead in hand. If you wanted to banish a Mizuki in grave to revive another zombie, you're out on both counts. In modern Yu-Gi-Oh, many decks rely heavily on the graveyard and treat it as a second hand where you can stockpile resources and store names in a more accessible spot than deep in the deck, and Necrovalley stops all of that. What it doesn't stop is grave setup, which is where Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos shine. While Necrovalley stops you from digging things out of the grave and other interactions within, your opponent can still move things into the grave so that they're ready to pop off if Necrovalley leaves the field. Dimensional Fissure and Macrocosmos redirect cards going into the grave to somewhere else, but don't stop the cards already sequestered in the grave from going that way too. But one area where Necrovalley beats Fissure and Cosmos and so many other powerful generic floodgates is searchability. Terraforming, Ancient Fairy Dragon, Gravekeeper's Commandant, and even Foolish Burial Goods dumping Rainbow Bridge of Salvation can all confirm your copy of Necrovalley. Even Favorite Hero can activate Necrovalley from deck, and in Duel Links, Neos fusion into Elemental Hero Brave Neos plus Favorite Hero into Necrovalley was lethally oppressive for a time. Using Metaverse to search Necrovalley in response to your opponent's play can build your field while shutting down their strategy, which is also good. Necrovalley is often considered kind of a poster child for Yu-Gi-Oh! Anti-meta. Printed way before the time when it would become most useful, Necrovalley waited until the game had advanced to a state that made it quite strong in reaction to whatever game-dependent metas it found itself in. Dragon Rulers, Necros, Zodiac, Zombies, and more all hated the oppressive heat of Necrovalley. The precision with which Necrovalley countered dominant decks cemented its place in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anti-meta legacy, and it will really never go away. As long as dominant decks rely on the graveyard, and they're never going to fully stop, Necrovalley is a threat that players have to contend with. The Valley of Eternal Rest forever looms on the horizon, and the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Lives in the strange shadows of its blistering sun. It is the number 1 pick for this list, and though usage of Necrovalley will go with the flow of the competitive meta, a time will always come when the field spell will rise again, and it will rise alone because when Necrovalley is on the field, everything else stays down. Alright, and that's the list. If I forgot your favorite card, or if you have ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. Thanks to HelloFresh for sponsoring today's video. Go to HelloFresh/TheDuelLogs and use my code DuelNov10 in order to receive 10 free meals plus free breakfast for life. 1 breakfast item per box subscription is active if you're in the US. The link and code are valid in all countries, and respective local discounts will apply.